By the time Richard Harlan called his wife unstable in front of a judge, Maggie had already learned the one thing he never expected from her. She had learned how to sit still. She sat in family court with both hands folded over her purse, listening while the man she had loved for more than 20 years told the court she forgot things, overreacted, and could not be trusted with primary custody of their son, Noah. Maggie did not cry. She did not interrupt. She did not look at Richard and beg him to remember who she was. Her attorney simply stood, opened her laptop, and said, "Your Honor, before we go any further, there is an email Mr. Harlan forgot to delete." The courtroom changed after that. Not loudly, not dramatically. It just changed. 3 months earlier, Maggie had only been trying to print a school form for Lily. The printer jammed. The little red error light blinked like it knew something she did not. Maggie opened the family computer, checked the print queue, and saw a file sitting there ahead of Lily's form. Custody narrative unstable angle. That was the first crack. Not a lipstick stain. Not a hotel receipt. Not a late-night confession. Just a file name on a family computer, waiting to be printed. And if you have ever been called crazy because you finally started noticing the truth, stay with this story. Subscribe for more stories about betrayal, divorce, custody battles, and the quiet kind of power that comes when someone stops begging to be believed. Maggie Harlan was 49 years old, and from a distance, her life looked almost boring. That was part of the trap. She lived in a quiet, middle-class suburb where the lawns were neat, the porch lights came on at dusk, and neighbors waved just long enough to be polite. People in places like that notice more than they admit. They notice when a husband stops coming home for dinner. They notice when a wife starts looking tired. They just pretend not to, because pretending is easier than asking hard questions. Maggie's house was not fancy. It was the kind of house built for raising children and arguing over bills. The kitchen cabinets were old. The dishwasher made a sound like it was clearing its throat. The refrigerator door was covered in school reminders, dentist cards, grocery lists, and a family calendar so crowded it looked like it needed its own assistant. Maggie was not perfect. She forgot where she put her keys. More than once. Sometimes she bought another jar of peanut butter, even though there were 2 already sitting in the pantry. On bad weeks, she would sit down on the couch after folding laundry and wake up near midnight with a towel still across her lap and the house dark around her. But Maggie was the reason the house kept running. She remembered Noah's dentist appointments. She paid Lily's school fees before the late notices came home. She called the plumber when the upstairs sink started leaking. She picked up prescriptions. She packed lunches. She answered teacher emails. She sent birthday cards to Richard's mother, even after that woman stopped acting grateful for them. And every morning, no matter how tired she was, Maggie still went to work. That was her gift. She did not make life glamorous. She made life possible. For a long time, Richard knew that. In the early years, he used to call her the steady one. Back then, it sounded warm. It sounded like love wearing ordinary clothes. He would say it at backyard cookouts, church events, and company dinners. He would rest his hand on Maggie's shoulder and tell people, "She keeps me grounded." Maggie believed him. Most women would have. That is one of the quiet dangers of a long marriage. You keep remembering the man who once meant what he said, and because you remember him, you keep making excuses for the man who no longer does. Over the last few years, the word steady changed. Richard still said it, but it no longer sounded like gratitude. There was something thin underneath it now. Something tired. Something almost amused. Like Maggie's loyalty had become a piece of furniture. Useful. Familiar. Easy to ignore until it got in his way. Richard began traveling more. There were sales conferences, client dinners, regional meetings, last-minute calls, and weekends that somehow became workdays. He talked about pressure like it was a private world Maggie could never understand. Targets, commissions, accounts, Clients who needed him. People depending on him. Maggie listened. Of course she did. That was what she had done for more than 20 years. She trusted first. She questioned later. Lily noticed before Maggie wanted to admit anything was wrong. 16-year-old girls are good at seeing the truth adults try to cover with normal words. Lily stopped asking whether her father would be home for dinner. She stopped saving stories for him. Sometimes she would glance at his empty chair and go quiet in a way that made Maggie's chest ache. Noah was only 9. He still believed adults had good reasons for disappointing him. He still asked why his dad could not make it to his baseball games. He still left drawings on Richard's desk and checked the next morning to see if they had moved, as if a moved paper meant his father had noticed. Maggie tried to fill the empty spaces. She clapped louder at Noah's games. She stayed up later with Lily's homework. She made pancakes on mornings when the house felt too heavy. She laughed a little more than she felt like laughing, because mothers learn to decorate silence when they do not want their children to feel the cold. But marriages rarely fall apart in one clean moment. Most of them cool down first. 1 degree at a time. Maggie could not say exactly when Richard started lying. Later, she would go back through her memory, searching for the first sign, the first crack, the first sentence that should have made her sit up straight. But lies do not always announce themselves. Sometimes they show up as stress, as work, as a tired man needing space, as one more reasonable explanation from someone who knows you want to believe him. The patterns came slowly. Richard's phone was always face down on the table. When Maggie asked about it, he smiled and said, "Just a habit." Then he changed his password and told her it was because of company security. He brought his laptop into the bedroom and angled the screen away when she walked by. He came home with a faint trace of perfume on his jacket and said hotel elevators were crowded places. Every answer was just reasonable enough to make Maggie feel unreasonable for asking. That was how he did it. Not with one giant lie, with small ones, one after another. Each wrapped in enough normal truth to make doubt feel rude. Then his language started changing. When Maggie asked ordinary questions, Richard turned them into emotional events. "Why are you so tense? You always jump to conclusions. You get overwhelmed too easily." He did not yell when he said these things. That was the cruelest part. Loud cruelty gives you something clear to point at. Soft cruelty makes you wonder if the problem is you. At first, Maggie made excuses for him. He was tired. He was under pressure. Men said careless things when work was hard. Marriages had seasons. Maybe she was too sensitive. Maybe she was exhausted. Maybe she really had been forgetting more than usual. Then Richard started saying those things in front of other people. At dinner with friends, he laughed and said, "Maggie gets overwhelmed when there's too much going on." At his mother's house, he sighed and said, "She forgets things when she's stressed." In front of a neighbor, with that calm smile people always trusted, he said, "She's been a little unstable lately." Unstable. The first time Maggie heard it, she barely reacted. The words slipped into the room quietly. Then it followed her home. She did not challenge him in public. She felt embarrassed. Worse, she felt childish for being embarrassed. So she gave a tight smile, changed the subject, and carried the word around for the rest of the night like something sharp in her pocket. Richard got better at it. He changed Noah's pickup time on the family calendar, then acted surprised when Maggie arrived late. He took bills from the mailbox, left them in his car, and later asked why she had not paid them. He told her he had mentioned Lily's parent meeting, but there was no text, no email, no note on the refrigerator. When Maggie pushed back, he looked tired. Not angry, tired. Like she was a difficult woman he had been patiently managing for years. That look hurt more than shouting would have. Shouting would have given her something to fight. That look made her question herself. She reread text threads. She wrote reminders on sticky notes. She apologized for things she could not prove she had done. She started moving through her own home, like a woman afraid of being wrong. That was the real gaslighting. Richard was not just hiding what he was doing. He was building a version of Maggie that other people might believe later. Vanessa entered the story as a harmless name. Just part of the team. That was what Richard called her. A sharp young woman from work. Good with clients. Ambitious. Helpful. Nothing Maggie needed to worry about. Maggie met Vanessa once at a company holiday dinner. Vanessa smiled too brightly, hugged Richard a little too long, and seemed to know more about Maggie's life than she should have known. She knew Noah played baseball. She knew Lily was applying for a summer program. She knew Maggie had been tired lately. Too much knowledge for someone who was just part of the team. But Maggie swallowed that feeling too. By then, Richard had trained her to distrust the one thing that had always tried to protect her. Her instincts. Then, one ordinary evening, Maggie saw her own name in a place it never should have been. It started with Noah's school trip form. Nothing dramatic, nothing romantic, nothing that should have split a family open. Just a permission slip, a printer that had been acting up for weeks, and Maggie standing in the small home office after dinner, trying to get one piece of paper printed before bed. The printer made a rough, choking sound, flashed an error light, and stopped. Maggie sighed, opened the family computer, and checked the print queue. She expected to see Noah's form stuck there. Maybe 2 copies. Maybe one of Lily's assignments. Instead, there was another document waiting ahead of it. Custody narrative unstable angle. For a few seconds, the words did not come together in her mind. Custody. Narrative. Unstable. Then she saw her name in the preview pane. Maggie Harlan has shown signs of emotional instability under pressure. The house kept making its usual sounds. The refrigerator hummed. Lily's pencil moved across the dining table. Noah laughed softly at something on television. But inside Maggie, the whole room dropped a few inches. She clicked before she had time to talk herself out of it. The document was not a diary. It was not a confession. It was not some emotional note Richard had written after an argument. It read like a plan. Richard had listed her reactions, her stress, her forgetfulness, the missed pickup he had created, the unpaid bill he had hidden, the parent meeting he had never told her about. Every little confusion had been saved. Not as a misunderstanding, as material. Then Maggie saw the email attached to the document. Richard had sent it to Vanessa. He wrote that Maggie reacted badly under pressure. He wrote that if he pushed the right buttons, she might lose control in front of an attorney, maybe even in front of a judge. Then came the sentence that made her fingers go cold. We don't need her to be dangerous. We just need her to look unstable. Maggie read it again. Slower this time, as if taking more time with the words might make them less ugly. It did not. Vanessa had replied below it. Once custody is settled, the house becomes easier. There it was. The affair was not the whole story. It was not just a bored husband chasing someone younger. It was not just selfishness or weakness or some midlife excuse dressed up as loneliness. It was strategy. Custody first. Then the house. Then child support. Then the new life Richard had been building while Maggie was packing lunches, signing field trip forms, and trying to keep the family from feeling cold. For one hard second, she wanted to run down the hall and throw open the door. She wanted to ask Richard what kind of man sits at a computer and plans to make the mother of his children look unfit. She wanted to call Vanessa and hear her explain how someone else's children had become steps in a plan. Maggie wanted to scream. Then she looked toward the living room. Noah had fallen asleep sideways on the sofa, one hand still wrapped around the stuffed bear he insisted he was too old to need. Lily sat at the table with headphones on, pretending not to watch her mother's face. And Maggie understood the trap. If she exploded, Richard would use it. If she cried, he would call it proof. If she confronted him too soon, the email would disappear. The file would vanish. And by morning he would stand there with that patient, tired expression, asking if she needed help. So Maggie did not scream. She did not call Vanessa. She did not touch Richard's phone. She did not guess passwords. She did not go digging through accounts that were not hers. She saved only what was already open on the family computer. She took clear photos of the screen. She wrote down the date and time. She copied the document title exactly. Then she backed everything up to a small drive she kept in her work bag. Her hands shook once. Only once. Then she closed the file, cleared the printer error, and printed Noah's school form. An hour later, Richard came home, smelling faintly of rain and expensive soap. He set his keys on the counter and looked at her with the same face he had been wearing for months. "Everything okay?" he asked. Maggie looked at the man who was trying to write her into a lie before she had a chance to tell the truth. Then she gave him a small, tired smile. "Just tired," she said. It was the first lie she told him to protect herself. Maggie started with a notebook. Not the kind of notebook people buy when they think their life is about to become a movie. There was no leather cover, no dramatic title, no angry pages filled with everything she wished she could say. It was just a plain blue notebook from the junk drawer, tucked under old batteries, a handful of rubber bands, and takeout menus nobody had used in years. On the first page, she wrote one word: timeline. Then she drew a line down the page and began doing something Richard had never expected from her. She began turning pain into records. The first date was the night Richard said he had a regional meeting and missed Noah's baseball game. The second was the afternoon he claimed Maggie forgot the pickup time, even though the family calendar had been changed, after she had already left work. The third was the dinner where he mentioned Vanessa's name 3 times, each time just a little too lightly. The fourth was the night the printer jammed and showed Maggie the file he had never meant her to see. Custody narrative, unstable angle. Maggie did not write a paragraph about how it felt. She did not write that her chest hurt so badly she had to sit on the closed toilet lid and breathe through her nose for 10 minutes. She did not write that she turned on the bathroom fan so Lily would not hear her crying. She did not write that for one terrible moment she felt like the past 20 years had been folded up and thrown away by a man who still expected dinner on the table. She wrote dates. She wrote times. She wrote names. She wrote amounts. She wrote what was said, what was changed, what was charged, and what Richard later pretended not to know. Because feelings could be twisted. Dates were harder to bully. That became the first rule of the new Maggie. Do not argue with a lie when you can document it. She checked only what belonged to the life they had built together. The joint checking account, the shared credit card, the family calendar, their tax returns, insurance statements, school emails, medical bills. The ordinary paperwork of an ordinary family. And that was the ugly thing about betrayal. Once you know where to look, it stops looking like one mistake. It starts looking like a system. The client dinners were not random. They happened too often. Almost always on Thursdays. Always late, and almost always near the same part of town. Richard had told Maggie those dinners were with buyers, regional partners, and people who expected him to stay visible if he wanted to keep the accounts. But the receipts told a cleaner story. Dinner for 2. The same wine, the same dessert, the same parking garage near the north side. Not proof by itself, but patterns are patient. They do not shout at first. They just sit there, waiting for someone to stop making excuses. Then Maggie found the monthly transfer. Consulting support. It looked boring. That was probably the point. Once a month, a payment left an account tied to Richard's side business. The amount shifted a little each time. Not enough to look dramatic. Not enough to set off alarms. Just enough to make Maggie pause. She did not understand it yet, so she saved it. That became her second rule. If something did not make sense, she did not explain it away for him. She saved it. 3 days later, Maggie sat across from Diane Mercer. Diane's law office was not warm in the way Maggie expected. There were no soft colors, no inspirational quotes on the wall, no gentle music playing low enough to make people cry politely. It was clean, quiet, and serious. A place where the furniture seemed to understand that people came there because something in their life had already broken. Diane was almost 60, with silver hair cut just below her chin and eyes that did not waste movement. She did not look cruel. She did not look sweet either. She looked like a woman who had spent 30 years hearing the difference between heartbreak and evidence. Maggie had expected to cry the moment she sat down. She did not. Maybe she was too tired. Maybe she was afraid that if she started, she would not stop. Diane did not ask if Maggie still loved Richard. She asked better questions. "Do you have children?" "Yes," Maggie said. "2. Do you share property?" "Yes." "Has he threatened custody?" Maggie's throat tightened. "Not directly." Diane looked up from her legal pad. That usually means yes, but carefully. Maggie opened the folder she had brought from home. The email came first, then the photo of the print queue, then the document preview, then the notes from the calendar changes, then the restaurant receipts, then the strange consulting transfer. Then the little records Richard had trusted her to ignore, because for years, ignoring uncomfortable things had been part of how she kept peace in the house. Diane read everything. Slowly. That was the part that almost broke Maggie. Not the email itself, not the receipts. It was watching another person take the betrayal seriously, without needing Maggie to perform pain for it. Diane did not gasp. She did not say, "I'm so sorry," in the soft voice people use when they want to be kind but do not know what to do. She turned pages. She made notes. She read the email twice. Then she leaned back in her chair. "According to what you have shown me," Diane said, "this is not just an affair. This is preparation." Preparation. The word landed harder than cheating. Cheating could be called weakness. Cheating could be wrapped in excuses, loneliness, stress, bad judgment, a foolish mistake at a conference. People had been dressing betrayal in soft language for as long as there had been marriage. But preparation was different. Preparation meant Richard had sat somewhere with a clear head and planned how to make the mother of his children look unstable. Preparation meant he was not just leaving Maggie. He was trying to rewrite her before she could defend herself. Diane explained the rules in a voice that made no room for panic. Maggie was not to confront Richard. She was not to touch his personal phone. She was not to guess passwords. She was not to open anything she did not have a legal right to access. She was not to become the person Richard was trying to describe. "If he wants to play dirty," Diane said, "do not follow him into the mud. That is where people like him want you." From that point forward, Diane told her the important things had to move through the proper channels. Discovery, financial disclosure, custody records, school records, medical appointment logs, bank statements, tax documents, real documents, real dates, real proof. Let him tell his story. Diane said, "We will build the record." So Maggie built it. At night, after Noah was asleep and Lily's bedroom door was closed. Maggie sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that usually went cold beside her. She sorted her life into folders. Noah's dental appointments, Lily's school emails, messages from the baseball coach, pharmacy receipts, parent-teacher reminders, medical bills, Photos from games where Richard was not beside her. Text from Richard saying, "Can't make it. Working." One message. Then another. Then another. A father missing one game could be busy. A father missing game after game became a pattern. Diane said it clearly during their second meeting. Custody is not about who sounds calm in one argument. It is about pattern. Maggie held on to that sentence like a handrail. Because Richard had always been good in a room. He knew how to lower his voice and sound reasonable. He knew how to tilt his head, as if patience had cost him something. He knew how to make Maggie's exhaustion look like instability and his cruelty look like concern. That was his gift. He could wound someone and then describe the bleeding as the problem. Soon after Maggie met Diane, Richard started pushing harder. One night, while Maggie was loading the dishwasher, he stood in the kitchen doorway and watched her for a little too long. "I think you need help," he said. Maggie looked at him. The old Maggie would have asked what he meant. She would have tried to soften the room before the fight began. She would have defended herself too quickly. Because innocent people often make the mistake of thinking explanations protect them. This time, she only waited. Richard gave her that careful face, the one that looked like concern from across the room and control up close. "I'm not attacking you," he said. "I'm worried. You've been emotional, forgetful. Maybe therapy would be good." He said therapy like a husband offering support, but his eyes were measuring her. Maggie understood what he wanted. If she refused, he could say she was defensive. If she agreed, he could say she was unstable. Either way, he thought he had handed himself a weapon and called it concern. So Maggie went, not because Richard suggested it, not because she needed to prove she was sane. She went because she needed one room in her life where she did not have to hold her face still. She chose her own therapist. She made the appointments herself. She kept the confirmations. She kept the receipts. She did not talk strategy in those sessions. She did not turn therapy into another folder for the divorce. She talked about sleep, fear, her children, the strange grief of living beside someone who had already decided to become your enemy. And if Richard ever tried to twist those appointments into proof that she was unstable, Diane would be ready. There was a difference between losing control and asking for help. Richard had never cared enough to understand that. Then he sent the message that changed the whole temperature of the case. It came on a Tuesday afternoon while Maggie was sitting in her car outside the grocery store. She had just bought milk, cereal, chicken breasts, and the brand of apples Noah liked because he claimed the other ones tasted too loud. Her phone buzzed. "Richard, if this goes to court, maybe we should finally talk about Noah." Maggie read it once. Then again, at first she did not understand it. Noah was their son. 9 years old. Soft-hearted. Terrible at lying. Good at forgiving people who had not earned it. He was the little boy who still asked Richard to play catch, even after Richard missed 3 games in a row. Then Richard's mother called that evening. Her voice was sweet in the way poison can be sweet. "I do not want to upset you," she said. But Noah never really looked like Richard, did he? Maggie stood in the hallway with the phone in her hand and looked at the family photos on the wall. There was Richard, holding Noah at the hospital. Richard asleep in the recliner with baby Noah on his chest. Richard teaching him to ride a bike in the driveway. Richard laughing when Noah missed a baseball and spun himself halfway into the grass. And now Richard was willing to put a question mark over his own child. Not because he believed it, because he thought it might hurt Maggie badly enough to make her stumble. That kind of cruelty is hard to explain to people who have not lived near it. It is not loud. It does not always curse. Sometimes it speaks in a calm voice and says, "Maybe we should talk about Noah," because it knows exactly where the softest part of you lives. Maggie did not answer his mother with anger. She did not defend herself. She did not hand them the scene they were waiting for. She ended the call as politely as she could and called Diane. Diane listened without interrupting. Then she gave the same calm instruction she had given from the beginning. Do not respond emotionally. If he wants to raise paternity, he can do it through counsel. If he wants a DNA test, we handle it legally. Do not fight him in text. Do not give him language he can print. After that call, Maggie sat on the edge of her bed and looked at Richard's message again. Maybe we should finally talk about Noah. It was cruel, but it was also useful. Richard had revealed his next move. Maggie saved the message. She took a screenshot. She added it to the timeline. Not because she feared the result, because she knew Richard had just left another fingerprint. The strange thing was, Richard still had no idea Maggie had a lawyer. He did not know about Diane. He did not know about the notebook. He did not know about the folders, the receipts, the records, the timestamps, or the quiet way his own choices were beginning to line up against him. And he certainly did not know that every time he tried to make Maggie look unstable, he was giving her one more piece of the truth. So Maggie learned to live two lives. By day, she was still the wife in the kitchen. She made dinner. She signed school forms. She asked Lily about quizzes and college brochures. She reminded Noah to brush his teeth, then reminded him again, because 9-year-old boys treat toothpaste like a suggestion made by a committee they never agreed to join. She answered Richard in a normal voice. Yes. No. Dinner is in the oven. Lily has practice at 6. Noah needs his cleats washed. Nothing in her face told him his name was now written across files in Diane Mercer's office. At night, Maggie became quieter, sharper. She opened the laptop after the house settled. She updated the timeline. She scanned school records. She printed copies of medical forms. She sorted receipts by month. She sent Diane short emails with attachments and no emotion she did not need to spend. Maggie looked tired. That was his mistake. He mistook silence for weakness, because men like Richard rarely understand discipline when it comes from someone they have underestimated. He began testing her more openly. On Noah's birthday, Richard arrived 40 minutes late carrying a grocery store cake and a story about traffic. Noah smiled anyway, because children often protect the parent who disappoints them. They do it without knowing. They make the smile bigger so the adult does not have to feel the failure. Maggie took a photo of the table before Richard arrived, not to shame him, to remember the truth. 2 days later, Richard said in front of Lily, "Your mother gets confused when she's stressed." Lily looked down at her plate. Maggie felt heat climb up her throat. She wanted to say, "Don't you dare do that to me in front of my daughter." She said nothing. Later, she wrote it down. Another weekend, Richard canceled the family dinner 20 minutes before they were supposed to leave. When Maggie asked why he had not told her sooner, he sighed, rubbed his forehead, and said, "This is what I mean. You overreact to everything." She wrote that down too. One night, after 10, Vanessa called. Richard walked into the laundry room to answer. The name on his phone said Vinder. Maggie saw it because he had left the phone on the counter for one careless second, and the screen lit up across the dark kitchen. She did not pick it up. She did not need to. She wrote down the time. The real turn came when Diane received Richard's first financial disclosure. At first, the papers looked clean. Too clean. Richard reported his salary, a retirement account, the shared credit card, the mortgage, and the car loan. He presented himself as a man with a decent income, but not much extra. Stable enough for custody. Limited enough that child support should stay reasonable. Diane read the disclosure with the flat expression of a woman who had seen neat lies before. Then she called Maggie. "Did Richard receive quarterly bonuses?" "Yes," Maggie said. "Are commissions part of his compensation?" "Yes." "Did he list a separate investment account?" Maggie paused. "What investment account?" And there it was. Another door. Richard had not listed his most recent bonus. He had not listed commission from a major contract. He had not listed a small investment account tied to a side company he had formed with an old college friend. Then Maggie remembered the transfer. Consulting support. Diane requested more records through the proper process. Richard's attorney objected at first, of course. People who hide things always act offended when someone asks for a flashlight. Diane did not blink. Paperwork moved. Requests were filed. Deadlines were set. And slowly, the clean version of Richard's finances began to come apart. The consulting payments were going to Vanessa. Not directly every time. Richard was careful enough to be insulting. Some payments moved through the small company. Some were marked as marketing support. Some matched dates of hotel charges. One landed 3 days before a weekend trip Richard had called a client retreat. Another matched a jewelry store receipt Maggie had never seen before. It was not just cheating anymore. It was family money being used to build an exit. Richard had planned to call Maggie unstable, push for custody, question Noah, reduce support, and make the house easier to take. All while smiling across the dinner table. The cold confrontation happened in the kitchen. It was late. Lily was upstairs. Noah was asleep. The dishwasher hummed softly, the way it always did when the house pretended to be peaceful. Richard stood near the sink with a glass of water, wearing the expression of a man about to say something he had practiced. "I think," he began, "it would be better if we both agreed you're not in a good place right now." Maggie dried her hands on a towel. She did not look away. Richard kept going, careful and smooth. "If this gets legal, I do not want it to turn ugly. But we have to be honest about your stress. For the kids. For the kids." That was the part that almost made her laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was disgusting. Maggie looked at him for a long moment, long enough that he shifted his weight. Then she asked, "Is that what you wrote in the email?" Richard's face changed. Only for half a second. But after 20 years, half a second was enough. "What email?" he said. His voice was light. Too light. Maggie folded the towel once and placed it on the counter. "The one you forgot to delete." Silence moved into the kitchen like another person. Richard stared at her. His mind was working. She could see it in his eyes. Which email, which file, which lie, which mistake had finally found its way back to him? Then he reached for the first defense men like Richard always seemed to find. "You've been snooping." Maggie did not raise her voice. "No," she said. "You've been careless." He blinked. She did not explain. That was the hardest part. Not opening the folder. Not listing every receipt. Not telling him that Diane had already seen enough to understand the shape of him. Maggie had waited too long to hand him the map now. So she left him there, standing beside the sink, holding that glass of water like it could steady him. For the first time in months, Richard did not know how much of the story still belonged to him. And how much now belonged to Maggie. Still. Richard walked into court wearing the face of a man who believed truth was something you could outdress. He had on a navy suit, polished shoes, and the same calm expression he used at company dinners when he wanted people to think he had everything under control. He spoke softly. He nodded at the judge. He looked concerned whenever Maggie's name came up, as if hurting her was something he had done reluctantly, with great maturity, for the good of the children. That was always Richard's gift. He could make cruelty sound responsible. His attorney described Maggie as emotionally unstable, overwhelmed, forgetful, not consistently reliable. Each word was placed carefully into the room, like furniture arranged before a sale. Richard sat there with his hands folded, looking sad and noble, while another man said out loud the story he had been building for months. Maggie kept her hands still. Her throat tightened once, but she did not let her face follow it. Diane noticed anyway. She placed one finger on the folder in front of her. Not yet. Richard said he only wanted what was best for the children. He said Noah needed structure. He said Lily had been affected by Maggie's moods. He said he had carried concerns privately for a long time because he did not want to embarrass his wife. That last part almost did it. Almost. Because there is a special kind of insult in hearing the person who broke your peace claim he was protecting your dignity. But Maggie stayed quiet. She had learned by then that silence can be mistaken for weakness. Right up until the record opens. Richard's performance was polished. Then Diane stood. She did not start with the affair. She did not start with Vanessa. She did not start with the ugliest email. That was why Diane was good. She started small. Richard had claimed Maggie forgot Noah's pickup time. Diane brought out the family calendar history. The pickup time had been changed after Maggie had already left work. Richard had made the change. Then he had taken a screenshot and used the confusion as proof. The room did not explode. It leaned in. Richard's attorney tried to soften it. A misunderstanding. A busy family calendar. These things happen. Diane nodded like she had expected that. Then she showed another one. And another. Small changes. Small delays. Small missing messages. Each one easy to explain alone. Together, they became something else. A pattern, Richard had said. Maggie struggled to manage school communication. Diane presented emails from teachers, counselors, office staff, and coaches. Almost all of them were addressed to Maggie. Almost all of them had been answered by Maggie. When forms were signed, Maggie signed them. When appointments were made, Maggie made them. When Noah needed cleats, medicine, a permission slip, or a ride, the messages led back to Maggie. Not because she wanted credit, because she had been doing the work. Then Richard's attorney brought up therapy. That was supposed to hurt her. It did not. Diane presented the appointment records and a short letter confirming Maggie had voluntarily sought support during a period of marital stress. There was no finding that she was unsafe. No recommendation that she should not parent. No record of violence. No instability. No loss of control. Only a woman who had asked for help before she broke. That mattered. Not loudly, but it mattered. Richard shifted in his chair. It was small, but Maggie saw it. For the first time that day, his face had to work harder to stay calm. Then he made the mistake Diane had been waiting for. He brought up Noah. His attorney said there were questions about paternity. The room changed. Not with noise, with temperature. Even people trained to stay neutral seemed to feel the ugliness of it. There are accusations that belong in a courtroom because they need to be answered. And then there are accusations thrown like glass because someone wants to see who bleeds. Maggie did not look down. She looked straight ahead. She thought of Noah, asleep on the sofa, with that stuffed bear in his hand. She thought of him checking Richard's desk to see if his drawings had moved. She thought of the little boy who still believed love should be simple, because no one had told him yet that adults could weaponize it. Diane had prepared for this, because Richard had warned them himself. The DNA test had been handled through proper legal channels. No drama. No secret envelope. No shouting in a hallway. Just paperwork, procedure, and a result that left no room for the story Richard wanted to tell. Richard was Noah's biological father. But Diane did not stop at the result. That would have proven paternity. It would not have proven cruelty. So Diane opened the email Richard had forgotten to delete. The same email that had first appeared because of a broken printer. The same email he thought would stay hidden because Maggie was too tired, too trusting, too used to blaming herself. The same email where strategy had been dressed up as concern. Diane read the line slowly. I know Noah is mine. But if I raise enough doubt, Maggie will panic. and support gets delayed. No one moved. That was the kind of sentence that did not need to be shouted. It only needed air. Maggie felt the words pass through the room and settle where they belonged. Not on her. Not anymore. On him. Richard's face went pale first, then tight. It was not grief. It was not shame. It was calculation failing in public. The judge looked at him differently after that. Because the issue was no longer just custody. It was credibility. It was intent. It was a father willing to put a question mark over his own son to gain leverage, while calling the boy's mother unstable. That is the thing about people like Richard. They trust the performance so much, they forget the paperwork has no loyalty. Then Diane moved to the money. Richard had reported his income as if bonuses were optional memories. He had left out commissions. He had failed to disclose an investment account connected to his side company. He had labeled payments to Vanessa as consulting. He had called dinners business expenses. He had used family money to fund a life he denied under oath. According to Maggie's attorney, in their state, hidden assets and dishonest financial disclosures could matter. Not because cheating magically solved everything in court. It did not. Diane had been clear about that from the beginning. But lying about money mattered. Lying about support mattered. Lying about custody mattered. And lying, while trying to make the other parent look unstable, told the court exactly what kind of story Richard was willing to tell when nobody checked his documents. Diane laid out the records, the bonus, the commission, the LLC, the consulting payments, the hotel charges, the jewelry receipt, the restaurant near Vanessa's apartment. One by one, the calm man in the navy suit became less calm. At first, Richard whispered to his attorney. Then he whispered again. Then his voice rose just enough for irritation to cut through the performance he had spent all morning building. That was the bitter part. The man who called Maggie unstable was the first one to lose control when the truth finally found him. Maggie did not smile. She wanted to. For 1 second, some small, wounded part of her wanted the satisfaction of it. She wanted to let him see that she knew. That Diane knew. That the court knew. That the version of Maggie he had tried to build was finally falling apart in front of him. But she did not smile. Because Noah's name was still in that room. Lily's name was still in that room. And Maggie had not come there to win a performance. She had come there to protect a life. The consequences did not arrive like fireworks. They came the way real consequences often come. In orders. Adjustments. Deadlines. Disclosures. Phone calls Richard could not charm his way out of. The court gave Maggie primary custody on a temporary basis, with Richard receiving scheduled visitation. Child support was calculated from his actual income, not the smaller version he had tried to sell. Diane requested further review of the hidden assets and the money that had moved through the company. Richard looked smaller after that. Not ruined, not destroyed, just smaller. Like the room had finally stopped reflecting back the man he wanted people to see. His employer began asking questions too. Vanessa was not just a harmless name in the background anymore. She was tied to payments, consulting labels, possible conflicts, and expenses Richard had treated like secrets with receipts attached. The company opened an internal review. Richard lost his management role. His bonus was frozen. People at work stopped speaking about him like he was the man who handled pressure well. Suddenly, the man who had spent years sounding important was buried under questions he could not answer cleanly. Maggie did not celebrate when she heard. She did not call Vanessa. She did not send Richard a message telling him he deserved it. She did not stand in the hallway and laugh, like pain had become a prize. She simply walked out of court, stood beside Diane in the cold air, and breathed like someone who had been underwater for months. Karma had not come with thunder. It came with an email, a timeline, a DNA result, bank statements, and a lawyer who knew when to let the evidence speak. Richard had tried to build a false version of Maggie before she could defend herself. But in the end, the version he built of himself was the one that survived. On paper. 6 months later, Maggie lived in a townhouse smaller than the home she had spent more than 20 years holding together. The kitchen was narrow. The cabinets were older. The living room did not have space for the big sectional she once thought she needed. There was no wide backyard where Noah could leave baseballs in the grass until Richard complained about the mower. But the townhouse was quiet. Not empty. Quiet. There is a difference. No one stood in the kitchen and told Maggie she was too sensitive. No one changed a calendar entry and watched her apologize for being confused. No one used her tired face, her therapy appointments, or her silence as evidence against her. For the first time in years, Maggie could misplace her keys and simply be a woman who misplaced her keys. Not unstable. Not careless. Not proof of anything. Just human. Lily took longer to soften. At 16, she understood enough to be angry, but not enough to know where that anger belonged. Some days, she barely spoke. Some nights, she sat on Maggie's bed and asked questions that had no clean answers. Why didn't you leave sooner? Maggie never punished her for asking. She did not say, "You'll understand when you're older." That line was too easy, too lazy, too often used by adults when they do not want to tell the truth. Instead, Maggie gave Lily the truth in pieces, small enough for a daughter to carry. I was trying to keep the family together. Then, after a pause, she added, and then I learned that keeping a family together cannot mean letting someone destroy you. Lily did not forgive everything at once. Children rarely do. But slowly, her bedroom door stayed open a little more often. She started telling Maggie about school again, about friends, about the summer program she was nervous to apply for. Small things. Ordinary things. The kind of things that prove trust is coming back, even when nobody says it out loud. Noah still saw Richard on schedule. Maggie made sure of that. She never used pickup days to punish him. She never whispered ugly truths into Noah's ear. She never turned a 9-year-old boy into a messenger, a witness, or a weapon. That might have been the hardest part. Not because Richard deserved protection, because Noah did. Maggie had won enough in court to understand that winning did not give her permission to become cruel. Richard did not disappear. Life is rarely that clean. He kept working, though not in the same role. The company no longer looked at him like the polished man who handled pressure. The bonus he once counted on was gone. Child support was based on what he truly earned, not the smaller number he had tried to present. He had to sell part of his investments to complete the property division, and every month, the payment reminded him that numbers are harder to charm than people. Vanessa did not stay long. Once Richard lost the title, the money, and the quiet thrill of believing he was smarter than everyone, the relationship became what it had probably always been. Expensive, temporary, and not nearly as romantic in daylight. One afternoon, Maggie received a text from Richard. I never meant for it to go this far. She looked at the message for a long time. The old Maggie would have written paragraphs. She would have explained the damage. She would have asked if he understood what he had done to the children. She would have tried, one final time, to make him see her clearly. But the old Maggie had spent too many years trying to be understood by a man who benefited from misunderstanding her. So she typed one sentence. It went exactly as far as your choices took it. Then she put the phone down. Not because she was completely healed. Healing is not a door you walk through once. It is a house you rebuild while you still remember the fire. Maggie still had bad days. Grief still found her in strange places. The cereal aisle, the school parking lot, The first holiday without the old table full of people pretending everything was fine. But grief was different now. It did not own the house. It only visited. What Maggie learned was simple, and it cost her nearly everything. Calm does not mean weak. Silence does not mean consent. And sometimes, the strongest thing a person can do is not scream until someone finally believes them. Sometimes the strongest thing is staying steady long enough for the truth to stand up on its own. That spring, Maggie took Noah to a baseball game. Lily sat beside her in the bleachers, eating popcorn from a paper bag and pretending not to smile when Noah waved from the field. The sky was soft. The evening was cool. Nothing about Maggie's life was perfect, but it was hers. And that mattered more than perfect ever had. Richard called her unstable because he thought a wounded woman would fall apart in public, but in the end, the email he forgot to delete proved the truth. The unstable one was never Maggie. If this story reminded you that red flags should not be ignored, subscribe for more stories about betrayal, divorce, custody battles, consequences, and the quiet moment people finally take their power back.